My mom screamed at me, "Get out and never come back." Those words weren't just a harsh sentence, they were a razor-sharp cut severing the last thread that held our family together. Imagine spending years secretly paying your parents' mortgage, only to be kicked out of the home you've been quietly saving. What would you do if your kindness was met with cold rejection? Have you ever felt like both the hero and the victim in your own family, where your love becomes a weapon used against you? For 32 years, I'm Stephanie, and I've done everything possible to protect my family from falling apart. Growing up in a modest 3-bedroom house outside Boston, I watched my mom's constant complaints, my dad retreat into silence, and my younger brother run away to escape the tension. I buried myself in school and part-time jobs, saving every penny to help keep our home afloat. I believed my sacrifices would build a bridge to unite us. But instead, they became chains trapping me in a cycle of resentment and loneliness. The real drama exploded one Sunday dinner when the truth came to light. For 5 years, I'd been secretly paying off their mortgage to save our family home. Yet when I revealed this, I was met with scorn, accusations, and my mother's bitter words. All my hard work, my career as a financial consultant, the late nights, I was dismissed as if none of it mattered. That moment shattered everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. Have you ever had to choose between self-sacrifice and self-preservation? Have you been the one holding a family together only to be pushed aside? Join me as I take you through this painful but necessary journey, one of reclaiming respect, setting boundaries, and discovering true love. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Now, enjoy the story. For as long as I can remember, family was supposed to mean home. A place that kept the rain out, kept my secrets safe, and, at least in childhood dreams, kept the world's heartbreak at bay. But in my family, underneath the surface of suburban normalcy, love and loyalty came tangled with anxiety, resentment, and silent betrayals that left scars no one ever saw. We lived in a tired 3-bedroom house in Riverside, just outside Boston. My mom, Carol, was the kind of woman whose voice seemed to carry from one end of the block to the other, the neighborhood's unofficial gossip messenger, always nursing some fresh complaint about her job at the dentist's office or the neighbor's latest fiasco. My dad, Michael, changed sales jobs every few years, always chasing hope but returning each time with just a little less. I still remember the hush that would fall over the house when the mail arrived, a warning sign the bills were due again. My younger brother, Ryan, was the smart one. Or at least that's what my mother always said, though it sounded less like a compliment and more like a curse every time he broke the rules and got away with it. Ryan didn't stick around long. After high school, he bolted to Seattle for college, and the only time his voice fills our old living room now is when he's a ghostly memory at the Thanksgiving table that never gets set. I tried to be the good daughter, the reliable one. The girl who picked up the slack, who brought home straight A's because failure wasn't an option, who worked every after-school shift at the grocery store just to leave a 20 on the kitchen counter for groceries we forgot to buy that week. My best friend, Kimberly, grew up just 2 blocks down the street, the daughter of a nurse and a retired firefighter. Their laughter would spill out of their cozy living room while I hid my own embarrassment over the way my mother would quiz guests with passive-aggressive questions about jobs and paychecks. It was a reminder, in my family, being a child meant being just responsible enough. There was so little space for innocence here. Sometimes, I'd escape to Aunt Patricia's house in New Hampshire for a weekend, the sister my mom secretly envied because Patricia seemed to keep her life, and her finances, perfectly in order. Those visits gave me a taste of what life might feel like without the constant pressure of walking an emotional tightrope. Afterward, it was always harder to come home. The older I got, the more I realized, love in our house was conditional. Affection, when it arrived, showed up in sideways comments or uncomfortable silences. My mom would sigh about how tired she was, as if my achievements were personal insults. My dad would quietly agree with her, choosing peace over sticking up for me, even though his eyes sometimes tried to apologize. By the time I hit high school, the difference between my family and everyone else's felt seismic. While my friends worried about prom or SAT scores, I was thinking about how to stretch my paycheck, how to keep Ryan from flunking out, how to make sure my mom and dad didn't explode at the dinner table. But those years also toughened me. They taught me how to survive on the edges of other people's chaos, how to bury pain deep, and, eventually, how to fight for the life I wanted, even if it meant building it alone. I wish I could say I saw it all coming. That I was prepared for how easily the ground would shift under my feet, for how the people I loved most could become the architects of my greatest pain. But the truth is, you don't know where your story will break until the moment it does. And mine was just getting started. Because what happens when all those years of sacrifice and hope collide with a family secret big enough to break every promise of home you ever believed in? What would you do, if every silent hurt, every overlooked kindness, suddenly came roaring to the surface? By my mid-20s, I thought I'd built a shelter for myself, a small apartment in Back Bay, a steady job in finance, the kind of stability I used to dream about when I was a kid trying to sleep through my parents' whispered arguments. But keeping myself afloat wasn't enough when a storm hit home. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday. My mom's voice was raw from crying, "We're going to lose the house, Stephanie." I remember the sting of dread as she described the foreclosure notice, the shame she tried, and failed, to hide behind a wall of blame. The words tumbled out. Dad had lost yet another job, their savings were gone, 3 months behind on the mortgage. Suddenly, the roof over all our memories was about to collapse. Without thinking, I emptied my savings to cover their late payments. I told myself it was temporary, a band-aid measure for a family hemorrhage. But one urgent payment became 2, then 3. Soon, I was meeting with their bank manager in a stiff suit, negotiating something they'd never done before, me taking over the mortgage discreetly, my parents' names left on the loan, my name hidden in the shadows. Not even my closest friends knew. That secret payment became a ritual, $1,875 every month, carved straight out of my paycheck. I set up an automatic transfer and, in a moment of twisted irony, set a digital reminder on my phone simply labeled "Home." But it was as if the more I tried to patch our family together, the more the seams started to rip. Where you'd expect gratitude, I got something different. Around the dinner table on Sundays, Mom would snarl about how some people get it easy, how jobs in fancy offices don't make you better than people who actually work hard. She'd needle me in front of her friends or neighbors, Mrs. Hahn from next door, Mr. McCarthy who used to carpool with Dad. Turning my career, my apartment, even my singlehood into punchlines at my expense. And each time, no matter how much Dad's eyes pleaded with me to just let it go, he never raised his voice in my defense. Sometimes, Aunt Patricia would visit from New Hampshire, her successes in business trailing her like perfume. Mom's resentment would flare up, towards her sister, towards me, towards any reminder that someone in this family had managed to get off the sinking ship. I'd find myself tiptoeing between their moods, biting back retorts and swallowing my own pride. Once, I overheard Mom tell Patricia, "Some people are always showing off about helping, but you know, real families don't need saving." The irony almost knocked the wind out of me. Inside, a current of resentment swelled. Here I was, delaying my own dreams, putting off buying a home, freezing out relationships that buckled under the weight of my loyalty, only to be met with suspicion and snide remarks. I became hyper-aware of how easily love could snarl into accusation, how quickly support could sound like control when someone feels powerless to save themselves. My closest confidant, Kimberly, started to notice the toll. One night over takeout, she asked, "Why do you always look so tired, Steph?" I brushed her off, too embarrassed to admit that I was wearing both my own burdens and my family's. The beautiful part of secrets is that they do protect, for a while. But all secrets rot if left unattended. The cracks in my facade grew. Some nights I'd catch my reflection in the office window, wondering if I even recognized the person staring back, torn between loyalty and a growing sense of betrayal. Quietly, without meaning to, my childhood home became just another obligation, a line item on a spreadsheet rather than a sanctuary. But I still hoped, every time I wired that money, that something would change. That my sacrifices would stitch us closer together. That one day their eyes would soften, and I'd finally be enough. Instead, the chasm only grew. And as those cracks widened, as every unspoken hurt stacked higher, I couldn't yet know that the storm was far from over, that the night everything would shatter was already on the horizon. Let's move forward, to the Sunday that changed everything. That Sunday, everything unraveled. The truth, that I'd been paying the mortgage for 5 years, spilled out, not as an act of pride but in a moment of painful honesty. Yet my confession didn't land as a gesture of love or loyalty. It detonated the simmering tensions in our family, unleashing a torrent of accusations. I was accused of meddling, of trying to control my parents' lives, of thinking I was better than them. When my mother screamed, "Get out and never come back," I was already drowning in disbelief. Her words lanced through me, sharper, somehow, than all the years of dismissive glances or snide remarks. The pain was immediate, but the echo of betrayal would linger far longer. I left the house, clutching a hastily packed bag, my childhood trophies and memories locked behind a door I'd just been banished from. My steps out to the car felt slow and surreal. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of city lights. There, in the silence of my living room, reality hit. I had to make a choice, not about them, but about me. Next to my laptop, my phone buzzed with a message from my dad I couldn't bear to answer. I stared at the automated payment for their mortgage, my finger trembling as I hovered over cancel. 5 years. Over $110,000. Was I really ready to cut the cord? I clicked. With that tiny confirmation, yes, cancel recurring payment, I severed not just a financial tie, but a chain of responsibility and guilt I'd been dragging for most of my adult life. But relief didn't come. Instead, emptiness, and waves of doubt that crashed hardest in the quiet, sleepless hours. For the first 3 days, I turned off my phone, no text from either parent. Some part of me, childish and stubborn, still hoped they'd send an apology, a call to come home. Instead, there was only silence, heavier than their anger had ever felt. Friends like Kimberly tried to help, staging an intervention with takeout and hard truths. "Why are you still defending her?" she demanded, when I hesitated to call what had happened abuse. "Your mother knows how to hurt you because she's the one who built those buttons inside you." Those words echoed in my chest, forcing me to look at what I had let myself become, a woman so desperate to be needed that I never once stopped to ask how much the cost was breaking me. Reaching out to Ryan, my brother in Seattle, felt like a small, flickering rescue. He'd left years ago, choosing distance over martyrdom. "They're emotional vampires, Steph," he said. He'd watched me sacrifice again and again, long after he'd accepted that they'd never be the parents we needed. Days passed. Dad sent lukewarm texts pretending nothing was wrong. "How's work?" Mom made pot roast. Then, "Can you help with the banking again?" The code was clear: mortgage payments, the house. I stayed silent, refusing to be baited back by guilt or manipulation. Only when the bank sent foreclosure notices did the messages turn frantic, then angry. "Fix this. Call us. This is your responsibility." It wasn't until then, amid their panic, that I saw the truth. My entire identity as a good daughter was a bargain that brought me only pain. Nights alone grew heavy. I cycled through anger, regret, and a deep-rooted sense of loss. Cutting off support wasn't just about money. It was a grieving, a funeral for every hope I'd had for reconciliation, for being worthy, for family to finally see me. I realized, through therapy and tearful talks with friends, that boundaries weren't cruelty, they were a form of love for myself. And yet, the guilt and ache of letting go never completely left. It would be weeks before I began to rebuild, before I learned how to fill the spaces that responsibility had once occupied. But that journey, toward healing, self-respect, and a new definition of family, was just beginning. And it started the moment I chose, finally, to put my own needs first. Next, I'll share what happened when my father finally showed up at my door, seeking answers, and perhaps, his own absolution. It was nearly 4 weeks since my mother told me to get out, since I'd severed the payment, the lifeline, that had tethered me, unwilling, to the wreckage of my family's home. I hadn't heard my father's voice in all that time except through muted, hollow text messages. Each one landed with practiced vagueness: "How's work? Hope you're doing okay." Meaningless pleasantries, carefully avoiding the gaping wound between us. Until the day my building's doorman called, his tone oddly formal: "Stephanie, your father is here to see you. Should I send him up?" My pulse spiked. Dad had never set foot in my apartment since I'd moved in 5 years ago. Not once had he cared enough, or maybe not dared, with Mom watching, to visit the life I'd struggled to build away from them. I walked down to the lobby, every step heavy with dread and a flicker of nervous hope. I found him there, smaller than I remembered, shoulders hunched like a man who'd spent too long weathering storms he never learned to face. A beat-up Red Sox cap nearly hid his worry-creased face. For a moment, he looked lost, my father, once my gentle giant, now just a tired man in an unfamiliar world. We sat in the corner, in a public but quiet space. For what felt like a lifetime, he was silent, studying his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin, brittle. "Steph, why'd you stop paying the mortgage?" It was the first honest question I'd heard from him in years. I met his eyes that always looked away when things got tough. "Why do you think, Dad?" I asked, pushing past the lump in my throat. "You know exactly why." He swallowed. "Is this because of what your mother said? You know how she gets. She didn't mean it." The excuse, the familiar minimizing, landed like an old bruise. When had I become the parent, bearing the weight of their mistakes? "She meant it," I said quietly. "Every word. You both did. And neither of you said sorry, not for the words, not for the years I spent saving you quietly while you pretended I was, what, a burden? A problem?" Dad's shoulders seemed to fold in on themselves. For the first time in my adult life, he didn't try to explain, didn't defend her, didn't pretend. "You're right," he said, voice soft. "We've relied on you to keep us afloat. And we let you take the blame for all of it. That wasn't fair, Steph. Not even a little." Raw honesty cracked through my anger. Mixed in was a grief I couldn't shake, the grief of a daughter who'd needed a champion, not just an audience. For a moment, we sat in the tension of everything unsaid. He told me about the foreclosure calls, about Mom's spiraling panic and her refusal to reach out to me directly. "She's cracked, Steph. You leaving, it put everything in motion, made us see what we'd done, to you, and to ourselves." My father had always chosen peace over confrontation. I never hated him for it, but I always wondered what it might feel like to see him stand up for me, for once, to see him pick me. Now, through his apology, something unexpected passed between us, respect, maybe, or the painful beginnings of forgiveness. Slowly, he reached across the table, cold hands covering mine. "I'm sorry. I should have protected you, from her, from all of it," he whispered. "I was weak." His admission didn't magically erase the years of silence. But it did loosen something heavy in my chest, made space for just a crack of hope that forgiveness could one day exist. I told him what I needed: boundaries, accountability, a real apology from Mom. That I was done saving them at my own expense. That love without respect would never be enough again. Before he left, he hugged me, awkward, but real. "I'm proud of you," he said, voice thick. I should have said that more. As I watched him go, I understood, sometimes healing begins with the smallest of cracks in old armor, a parent's first true admission of failure, a daughter's boundary finally respected. But if there was to be any future for us, it would have to be built on honesty, and on all of us learning to stand upright, without leaning on someone else until they broke. The next step would be the hardest yet, facing my mother in the house I'd once called home. But for the first time, I felt a measure of resolve. Maybe this time, I would walk in as an equal. Let's step together into that long-overdue reckoning. The day of the family meeting arrived with a heaviness I hadn't expected. As I pulled into the driveway of the house that once felt like a sanctuary, a strange detachment settled over me. Every step toward the front door felt like crossing a battlefield. This wasn't just a house, but a landscape marred by years of broken promises, simmering anger, and words we'd never dared to say out loud. I rang the doorbell, not using my key. A small, almost defiant act, marking the line. I was a visitor now, not the daughter who once had free rein. Dad opened the door, relief etched deep in his tired face. "Stephanie," he said gently. "Mom's in the living room." The familiar scent of lemon polish on old wood and my mother's floral perfume crept around me, a bittersweet blend of nostalgia and dread. Mom sat upright on the edge of the couch, posture stiff, her expression an uneasy mask barely containing the turmoil underneath. For the first time in years, Aunt Patricia wasn't present. This reckoning would be just the three of us, exactly as it needed to be. Dad took a breath, clearly rehearsing his words. "Thank you for coming. We appreciate you being willing to talk." The silence that followed settled in the room like fog, thick and hard to see through. Mom finally spoke, her voice pointed. "The bank called again yesterday. They're moving forward with foreclosure." No apology, no acknowledgement of what drove me away. Disappointment lanced through me. "Is that all you have to say?" I forced myself to sound steady. Her response was defensive until Dad rested his hand over hers, a silent plea for honesty. Hesitating, she said, "I may have overreacted that day. I shouldn't have told you to leave." The words cracked her armor, but I needed more than regret. "Why?" I pressed. She sighed, struggling to keep her feelings hidden. "I was embarrassed, humiliated. Finding out you paid our mortgage, that we couldn't manage alone, and in front of Patricia. It broke me." The mention of her sister, the perfect, successful one, spoke volumes. This had never been just about the house. It was pride, jealousy, fear of seeming like a failure. "Your pride was more important than acknowledging 5 years of help," I said, forcing myself to keep calm. She shook her head. "It wasn't like that." Dad cut her off, steady and uncharacteristically firm. "Carol, it was like that. We took advantage of Stephanie's generosity. We never really thanked her. Not once." The honesty hung in the air, finally breathing into our suffocating silence. Words rushed out, how I'd paid $112,500, quietly, over 5 years. Dad flipped through the evidence, each receipt another bandage over wounds we never discussed. He whispered, "I had no idea it was this much." "That's because none of you ever asked," I replied. "You accepted the help. You never even tried to see the cost." Mom looked away, her voice small. "Thank you, and I'm sorry. I didn't mean what I said." Her admission, raw and tentative, was more than she'd ever given me. She confessed her jealousy, the shame of seeing me succeed while she struggled, how anger was easier than gratitude. We were bruised, fragile, but in that moment, a fragile bridge formed, a chance at new connection. Dad asked, "Where do we go from here?" Drawing from therapy, pain, and hard-won hope, I laid down what I needed to maintain any future together. "First, I won't resume the payments. But I'll help you plan for independence, downsizing, a real budget, a future that doesn't need my help." Dad nodded. "That's fair. Second, things must change. No more criticism. No more passive aggression or surprises. I'm your daughter, not your bank, not your emotional punching bag. Mom flinched but didn't argue. Finally, I said, I need time to heal. Sunday dinners will be occasional, calls only when I'm able. Any future support must be openly discussed and truly appreciated. It was a heavy silence, but finally, Mom's voice softened. You've become such a strong woman. I don't know that I'd have had your courage. With those words, something rare flickered, not just regret, but a hint of respect. Dad promised to respect my boundaries and focus on changing their financial habits. As I drove away, a weight lifted I hadn't known I was carrying. This wasn't an ending, but a fragile, hopeful beginning. We were finally acting not out of obligation, but choice, a new foundation, built from truth. In the days after, we'd face the daunting task of rebuilding, from selling the old house to forging new connections. But now, for the first time, we had something real to build on. The weeks after our family's reckoning felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a canyon, every step fragile, every old shadow threatening to pull me off balance. Letting go of the house wasn't merely a real estate transaction, it was a full-body grief, the kind that comes from packing decades of laughter, heartbreak, and raw, unfulfilled hopes into a parade of cardboard boxes. Each item came with its own memory, its own ache. I remember Mom clutching a chipped plate from my childhood, her voice trembling as she whispered, "This was mine." That single, unexpected tenderness seemed to break through years of tension, a reminder that even resentment can carry the pulse of love. Yet, perhaps the most startling change came from Dad. The confrontation had awakened something in him, not just responsibility, but engagement. For the first time, he tracked expenses and budgets with a diligence he'd never shown, as if facing the crisis finally gave him purpose. He even managed the sale of our old house, steadying Mom in moments when she threatened to unravel. Moving day arrived all too soon. Our new space, a modest, sunlit condo, held none of the trappings of the old life. Dad took my hand and quietly admitted, "It's not our house, Steph. But it could be our home." I caught Mom dabbing at her eyes as she looked at the empty living room, a silent admission that loss and hope sometimes arrive as twins. The old dynamics didn't vanish overnight. There were relapses. Mom sometimes slipped back into old patterns, and I sometimes braced for criticism that never came. But gradually, the air in our conversations changed, fewer sharp words, more honest silences, and, dare I believe, flickers of trust. Even their marriage seemed to shift. Dad grew more assertive, and Mom grew softer, less inclined to launch the first attack. As the constant financial drain finally eased from my shoulders, my own life expanded in ways I hadn't imagined possible. I poured new energy into my job, and when a promotion came, it wasn't seized with guilt but with pride. I let myself accept invitations, pursue hobbies, and, slowly, open up to love again. James came into my life quietly, a patient, gentle lawyer. Instead of rushing or demanding, he offered exactly what I'd always given away, understanding and respect for my boundaries. My relationship with Ryan finally began to heal, too. Trips to Seattle became small sanctuaries. Places where we laughed about the past and, for the first time, felt like true siblings rather than battle-scarred survivors. Therapy remained my anchor. Dr. Matthews would gently remind me, "You are valuable simply for existing, Steph, not for what you sacrifice." Some days, I could almost believe her. The truth is, journeys like this aren't a straight line. Old wounds crack open. There are nights of sorrow and days full of gratitude. Each step away from martyrdom was one I had to fight for, but with every bit of progress, I reclaimed a piece of the self I'd nearly lost. Our family will never be perfect. Some days the peace is so fragile I fear breathing might shatter it. But with all we endured, the rebuilding gave us something real for the first time: choice, respect, and a foundation of honesty. And to anyone listening, wondering if change is possible or worth the pain, I promise you, it starts the moment you choose boundaries and learn to love yourself as fiercely as you once loved others. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. It means a lot to me that you're here, joining me on this journey. If you found the story meaningful or helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and reach others who might benefit too. And please don't hesitate to leave a comment below. Your feedback and thoughts are always welcome and help me create better content for you. Thanks again, and take care.